Genesis chapter 45. You know, a lot of us, we hear, we have a grasp on what the sovereignty of God is. We like discussing it, we like studying it, but like anything, we don't like to apply it. Today, we will look of one of the most practical application of the sovereignty of God theology. It's one thing to know and it's one thing to apply. As a recap, as we know, as we look into the life of Joseph. Joseph, the story of Joseph started in Genesis chapter 37, wherein he did nothing wrong. The only sin or thing he did wrong was that he was the favorite of his dad, Jacob. And the only reason why he was the favorite, or one of the reasons, is because he was the child of the woman she loved, Rachel. And he was a child, as the Bible says in Genesis chapter 37, of his old age. Because of that, his brothers was against him. Especially after the dream, wherein he told his brother that, I had this dream that one day you all will bow down to me. And that was so offensive to them. Then the dad made a collared coat, and that was offensive. The hatred was so much that they could not speak to him. All they wanted to do was to kill him. But instead of killing him, his brother, half-brother, Judah, said, no, let's just sell him and get 20 silvers. Let's sell him to slavery. This is despite the fact that he was begging in the pit that the brothers would rescue him, but they did not. So when Jacob told Joseph to just check his brothers, little did he know that was the last time he will be stepping in the promised land. In Genesis chapter 38, we see now Judah having an affair with his daughter-in-law, Tamar. And how he was a hypocrite, trying to condemn Tamar with the very sin that he committed. All along, while this was happening, in Genesis chapter 39, Joseph arrives in Egypt, a slave of Potiphar. Remember, he was a slave because of jealousy. He was a slave because of hatred, of envy of the brothers. He did nothing wrong. How painful is that? The brothers whom you expect to be loving you, the very people that you expect to be protecting you, were the very ones that are persecuting you. So he ends up in Potiphar's house as a slave, and he grows up the ranks because he was doing very well. But the problem is the wife of Potiphar had a crush on Joseph. And because of that, he accused Joseph of what? Raping her. But Potiphar did not believe, as we studied. He did not believe the wife's accusation and just sent Joseph into the house of Pharaoh. That's Genesis chapter 38, 39. And in Genesis chapter 40, there in the house of Pharaoh, he languished. I believe he was in jail for about 20 so years. And there, God was working. God placed a dream in the mind of... God caused first the cupbearer and the bread maker to fall out of grace with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh brought them to jail, and there God brought a dream to them. And Joseph was able to interpret those dreams, and true enough, it happened. The bread maker was killed, and the cup bearer was restored back to its position. The only thing that Joseph requested was, remember me and tell Pharaoh that I'm not guilty. Weeks passed, days passed, months passed, never heard from the guy. 2 years has passed, never heard from the guy. But God was working. He brought a dream to Pharaoh in Genesis chapter 41. And there, the dream was so bothersome that he couldn't sleep. He called all his magicians, he called all his diviners, and guess what? No one could interpret the dream. But the cupbearer remembered. He remembered Joseph and said, hey Pharaoh, I met this guy who was able to interpret my dream. Maybe he could interpret your dreams. And what happened was, Pharaoh told them to get Joseph, and Joseph indeed interpreted the dream. And said, there will be 7 years of plenty, and there will be 7 years of famine. That is the dream. And he gave his unsolicited advice. He said, because of that, let's make a plan. Let's tax them 20% of their grain. Pharaoh found it so good that he appointed him to be second in command. He had the new clothes. He had a chariot. He had the signet ring of Pharaoh, symbolizing that anything that he puts his mark on is as if Pharaoh placed the mark on. He was that powerful. He was second most powerful. Not only that, he married into a very powerful family of priests, the second most powerful. And a lot of people, as I mentioned, read this story and think that the story of Joseph is climaxed here in Genesis chapter 41. Be faithful like Joseph, and one day God will reward you for that faithfulness. But unfortunately, that is reading the story wrongly. Genesis chapter 41 is not the big payoff. And if you ask me, it is the darkest moments of Joseph. Why do I say that? Because of the theme. Remember, the theme of Genesis is divided into what? The land, the sea, and the covenant. In Genesis chapter 1, what happens? God said, I will separate the land from the sea. And He said, this sea that will multiply itself among its same kind. And He made a covenant, the Adamic covenant with Abraham. Then we jump in Genesis chapter 3, what happens? Adam and Eve sinned. And when they sinned, what happened? God put them out of the land, Eden. But, what did God do? He made a covenant and said, your seed will crush the seed, the head of the serpent. Land, seed, and covenant. Then it goes to Noah. People were sinning left and right. The whole world was sinning. The sons of man, the sons of God, was marrying the daughters of men. It was sinful to the max. And God said, I cannot stand this anymore. I will wipe out the face of the land. But I will protect the seed, which is Noah. And after 40 days and 40 nights, which is equivalent to about 200 days or so, God made a what? A covenant with Moses, right? With Noah. that never again will this happen. And he placed a rainbow, so that when people see that rainbow, they will remember the covenant that God made a promise that He will never annihilate the world in this manner again. And to the Jew, or to the Hebrew, when they see that bow, it's a sign that the warrior has hanged his arrow already. Then we see Abraham. God told Abraham what? To leave this land of Haran, to go to a land which I will show you. And there you will be the father wherein the seed will come forth. And he made a covenant with Abraham. Now, when we look at the theme of Genesis in that manner, and we look at Genesis chapter 41, we cannot say that this is the big payoff day. Why? He is not in the land. He was in Egypt. And Egypt symbolizes what? All the worldliness, all the sin. He was not with a covenantal family, Jacob. He was serving Pharaoh, who is a pagan, who is worshipped as a god. He had an Egyptian name. He was married to an Egyptian woman. Remember, Abraham said to his servant, look for a spouse for Isaac. Put your hand on my thigh and make a promise that you will not get a Gentile. Just our people. And here, Joseph marries an Egyptian whose dad is the second most powerful priest. How can that be the biggest payoff? But that is how people read Genesis chapter 41. Remember, Genesis chapter 41, Genesis chapter 37 to 50 is not about Joseph. Right? The Bible, the book of Genesis could be, as I mentioned before, divided into Toledots, right? The Toledot of Abraham, the Toledot of Noah, the Toledot of Isaac, Ishmael, all those names, right? And in Genesis chapter 31, Toledot means what? This is the generation of. In Genesis chapter 31, what does it say? This is the generation of whom? Jacob. Genesis chapter 37 to Genesis chapter 50 is all about Jacob. And if we are to study Jacob, we have to study Jacob in light of what's happening with Joseph. Then what happens in Genesis chapter 42? True enough, there was a famine. And now Jacob tells his sons, oh, paanga kayo dyan. Go to Egypt. Get some food. They went to Egypt. The first thing that happened is Joseph spotted them. Oh, this is my brothers. But they could not recognize him. Why? He shaved. The last time they saw him, he was 17 years old. Now he's 40. He's dressed differently. Right? He spoke Egyptian. In fact, when he was talking to his brother, he was through the interpreter. And he had an Egyptian name. And the first thing that Joseph asked is, as I mentioned, he was counting. There was one guy missing, Benjamin. His full brother. And what he wanted to know was, is Benjamin still alive? Or did my brother also murder him because he was the next favorite? Because he was the next favorite. Right? So he devised a test among the brothers. They failed all. No one wanted to go. No one wanted to stay. No one was a leader. No one had integrity. In chapter 43 and 44, we see here now Judah rising up to the occasion. He rises up to the occasion and passed every test. Every test that was given. They went back, had a party with Benjamin. When the party was done, they were all drunk. And it was intended for them to get drunk because Joseph wanted to get Benjamin. And he wanted to see if the brothers will care enough for Benjamin. They did. Remember when they got Simeon? Right? The brothers never went back for Simeon. The only reason why they picked up Simeon again was why? They ran out of grain. If they did not run out of grain, guess what? Simeon would die in Egypt. They never went back for him. They only went back because umusan ng pagkain. Paano na? So, Benjamin was kept. But because of that, what happened was, Judah rises up and says, I'll be the substitute for Benjamin. All this time, all these moments, the first visit and the second visit, Joseph was crying in public and private, saying his brothers, he was so touched. In Genesis chapter 43, we see redemption. Judah was willing to go to Egypt and redeem Simeon. In Genesis chapter 4, we see substitutional atonement. Judah was willing to put his life in the place of Benjamin. And now in Genesis chapter 45, what do we see? Forgiveness. Redemption, substitutional atonement, and forgiveness. That's the gospel. Being lived out. Right? So, there he is now, Joseph convinced that his brothers has changed, particularly Judah. Because before, remember, sabi mo, what's so amazing here is this. Judah was a daughter of Leah. Son of Leah. The outcast wife. The wife that no one loved. The wife that was tricked into marrying, the wife that tricked Jacob into marrying her. She was the unloved wife. All along we thought it was an accident. All along we thought it was a mistake. Logically, you would say the chosen seed should be Joseph. Because Judah, we saw in chapter 38, what was he doing? Sleeping with a prostitute. He was not faithful at all. But that only shows, it only exemplifies the meaning of grace. There's nothing to show. What's there to show? Nothing. Only sin. And when Judah was willing to replace himself for Benjamin, it really broke the heart of Joseph. Remember, these brothers, these 10 brothers of his, had so much resentment towards Joseph. The magnitude of action that they did against Joseph was painful. They wanted, try to imagine, if you have a brother who wants to kill you. Try to imagine that. If you're a brother nga who doesn't want to kill him, it's really bad at you, really feel bad. Not only that, the severity of the consequence of what the brother did. How deep is the scar? Okay lang if the consequence was 1 week. The consequence here is 20 years. He lost 20 years with his father whom he loved. The amount of time. It's almost a permanent time that can never be redeemed back. I don't know about you if you've been hurt by somebody. If somebody has wronged you, if somebody wanted to kill you, sold you to slavery, and you were locked up there. You know, he was the second most powerful man in Egypt, but he was still a slave of Pharaoh. That's why, remember, what did Joseph say? This land is a land of what? Affliction. Because Joseph was longing for the promised land. No amount of wealth, no amount of power can replace his desire to be reunited again with his covenantal family in the promised land. Go to Genesis chapter 45. After seeing the great love of Judah, Joseph could not control himself before those who stood by him. He cried and said, "Make everybody go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. At the start, in Genesis chapter 37, the hatred of the brothers could not be contained. In Genesis chapter 45, the love of Joseph now cannot be contained. Verse 2, and he wept out loud so that the Egyptian heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Can you imagine? If you were the brothers, you don't know he was Joseph. All you know, he's the second most powerful person in Egypt. And he's crying in front of you. Right? And you know that, remember, they stole the silver goblet. They're accused of spying. Man, what will he do to us now? What will he do? It's like all of a sudden, our whole family is called to Malacanang, and all of a sudden, Duterte comes out and tells all the people to leave, and he'll talk to you, and he starts crying. Patay tayo dito. And you know that you are being accused by Malacanang for graft and corruption. That's it. We'll die. Verse 2, and he wept aloud, so that the Egyptian heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Imagine, the Egyptian say, what could be happening? We can hear Joseph crying. What's going on? The Egyptian doesn't know yet. They're perplexed. Ba't umiyak si boss? Verse 3, and Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they are dismayed at his presence. It did not register, I am Joseph. There's many Joseph. All they know is the brothers know kasi my brother is dead. We have a brother, but can't be him. He's dead. So it's like somebody coming to you, a stranger, and says, I'm Joseph. Is dad alive? Is my father alive? I don't know with you. Who are you? Right? And they were dismayed. The word dismayed there is they were paralyzed in fear. What is he talking about? Not only that, what's perplexing is this. He's speaking in Hebrew. Huh? Speaking Hebrew. Because all along he was speaking in Egyptian, right? Through an interpreter. Now this guy, crying aloud, the second most powerful, is saying, there you are, Joseph. And where's Dad? Parang tinagalog ka ng isang mistiso. Yeah, in YouTube, you see some foreigners, right? They'll talk Tagalog, wow! Right? Get off guard. Now, realize this. Joseph is in a position of power and authority. He could have killed them. And no one would question. He stole, right, guys? He stole. They stole. Not once, twice. The money, right? They ran away in Genesis chapter 42. And now the silver cup. He could have easily killed them if he had bitterness and anger and unforgiveness in his heart. But he did not. Go to verse 4. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. And they came near. He said, I am your brother, Joseph. What? Can't be. Yes. I am your brother Joseph, whom you have sold into Egypt. That knowledge, before, I am Joseph. They didn't get it. They were shocked, but they didn't get it. Now he became very specific. I am your brother, Joseph. How sure are you? Whom you sold in Egypt. No one knew. Even Jacob did not know. The only people that knew about that fact can only be Joseph and the other brothers. I mean, you murder somebody, will you tell him the whole world? He'll not. It was terrifying for them. What? What's going on here? Outrageous. Verse 5. And now, do not be distressed or angry with yourself because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Here he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. We have to realize this. There is a saying, forgive and forget. That's not true. Joseph did not forget. You are not supposed to forget. If you're a normal human being, you will not forget. You will forgive. But forgiving does not connote that you would forget things. So some people think, no, Bob, I haven't forgiven because I still remember it. That's fine. To be forgiven, what that means is to cancel a debt. That's the concept of forgiveness. To cancel a debt. If somebody bumps my car, right? And I told him, bro, I forgive you. But by the way, here's the bill. That's not forgiving. When you forgive, you remove your right to collect a payment from that person. So some people say, Bob, I forgive him, but I don't want to see him anymore. Bob, I forgive him, but I cannot speak with that person anymore. That's not forgiving. Because you're letting him pay for the sins that he has done to you by withholding affection. So to say that you have forgiven, you're saying what? I will not anymore ask you to pay for that infraction. And a lot of us, sadly, we don't forgive. We say it in our mouth, but we really don't. Yeah, I have forgiven him, Bob, pero ayoko na siya makita. Talagang ayoko. Baka mag-away lang kami. Right? Go to Matthew chapter 18, please. Matthew chapter 18, verse 35. Says, so also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you, if you do not forgive your brothers from your heart. Some people, they say they forgive, but they really don't forgive from their heart. They still want to extract a payment. You know, I remember in the Philippines, and I'm sure you know, in the Philippines, a lot of people get swindled, right? And what happens? During confrontation, the victims, they want to extract payment. They try to punch. It's so funny talaga. The police will allow a little punching. Oh, punch mo na, okay. Oh, tama na yan. Tama na yan. That's kind of weird, right? You allow semi-free for all, but you're extracting basically payment. But think of this. If you don't forgive, what are you saying? The sins. You know, I also think like people that are molested by their relatives, right? Those are painful sins done. But if we don't forgive, what are we saying? Well, the sin that was committed to you, follow me here, the sin that was committed to you has been forgiven. By whom? By Christ. Right? That forgiveness has been acceptable to God because of the work of Christ. And when we choose not to forgive, what are we saying? Lord, that sin might be good enough for you, but it's not good enough for me. The forgiveness of Christ, His work on the cross, the tetelestai, it is finished, paid in full. I took the debt. Yes, God, it's good enough for you, but it's not good enough for me. Ay, ano ka? What's the concept there? Pride. And when we choose not to forgive, we're hypocrites. Matthew 18, right? The guy was pleading, Lord, have mercy. Pity me, Master. I can't really pay, and I can't really pay. The Master forgives him. What does he do in turn? He doesn't forgive the other one who owes him less. In fear, when the brothers realized indeed this was Joseph, he knew it because he said, you sold me into Egypt, right? Verse 5, and now do not be distressed or angry. Joseph is now trying to calm the spirits of the brothers and say, guys, don't be distressed. Because you sold me here, for God set me before you to preserve life. This is a classic text of man's will and the sovereignty of God. Yes, you sold me here. It was your choice. On the other hand, but God sent me here. Joseph did not try to reconcile the sovereignty of God and the free will of man. He just states it as a fact. Verse 6, for the famine has been in the land for these 2 years. 2 years pa lang. It's the start of the famine. And there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. Verse 7 basically elaborates verse 5. Because remember here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. Whose life? Whose life? Verse 7 explains. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. And if you look the word remnant and survivors, these are the chosen people. So God, Joseph is saying, God sent me here not to save the Canaanites as a whole, or not to save everybody. I came here for the specific reason to save the remnant, where the seed is, which is Jacob, then Judah. The lives that the life that Joseph intended to save was just the covenantal family. Damay-damay lang lahat. Nadamay lang. Okay lang. Nadamay. Verse 8. So it was not you who sent me here, but God has made me father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house, ruler over all the land of Egypt. Proverbs 19:21 says, many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. You know, we have to remember this, that God is always up to something good when people sin against you. God is always has something good when people are offending you. Why? For all these things work together for good. Romans 8. All these things, all this tragedy, all the sin, all the things that people are putting to you are not an accident. The sovereignty, it is because of that knowledge that Joseph was able to forgive. You've done this to me, but God used that. Because God is sovereign. That there is nothing that's happening in my life that is an accident. When you have that view of the sovereignty of God, you will forgive. That's why Joseph was able to forgive. He did not say, God, why naman did you bring me these brothers? I cannot forgive them. How can I? Hindi man ako martir. They did this, they did that, they sold me, they wanted to kill me, they maligned me, I begged to them, they did not care. How can I forgive them? I can only forgive them if I see the hand of God working in and around me. Because if God is really sovereign in your life, as I said, accidents and mischances are thrown out of the window. Then Joseph now has a message for his dad. Verse 9. Hurry, go up to my father. Hurry, make haste. Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord over all Egypt. Come down to me and do not tarry. Verse 10. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me. You and your children and your children's children and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I have provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty. What does Joseph say? Guys, hurry up. Pick up Dad. Take not only Dad, but all our family. Not only your children, but also your grandchildren. And come into this fine land of Egypt. Come here. Bring everybody. Why? Because I want to be close to you. That's what that verse 10 says. You shall be near me. You know, people that we can't forgive, we want them far away from us. Lumayo ka sa akin. Right? But here, He wanted them to be close. Why? For He has forgiven them and loved them. And you ask, how is this possible? Only by the grace of God. No other way. As a normal guy that has not been transformed, they will never say this. They will never act this way. Hawa. Sira ka ba? Ba't di mo ba siya niiwanan? Right? That is the mindset. Verse 12. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. You shall tell my father of all my honors in Egypt, and all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here. Then he fell upon his brother's neck and wept. I'm reminded by the prodigal son, right? It's the same wordings. Hanging tight, crying, weeping at the neck. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked to him. What happened? Naghagulhulan. Nag-iyakan, nagyakapan. They were hugging each other. Showing what? The love for one another, the unity, that forgiveness has conquered all. The knowledge of God's sovereignty was able to wipe out all the offenses. You know what's amazing about this? Amazing about this? In the New Jerusalem, which will be headed by the line of Judah Christ, it is said that there are 12 gates locked arm in arm around the New Jerusalem. On that 12 gates are names of the 12 tribes of Judah. Wow! The sign of unity, the sign of family, the sign of relation restored will be forever etched in all eternity with their names there. How beautiful is that? I was blown by that. And the pillars of that gates, the 12 pillars, are the names of the 12 apostles. What beauty of restored relationship brought about by the knowledge that God is sovereign, that this tragedy, this pain, this difficulty that was brought by the very people that love me was not out of the view of God, but but in fact was part of the plan of God. Sabi ko nga, the famines and the trials was used by God to transform the brothers. Transformation is never easy. And God will use all means to conform you into His image and likeness. Sabi ko nga this is sovereignty applied. You say we believe in the sovereignty of God, yet you can't forgive. Guess what? You don't. Ito, example, si Joseph. That is his argument. That is his point of consideration. You did that sin, but that was a plan of God to redeem the seed, to protect the seed. Verse 16. When the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come. It pleased Pharaoh, his servant. So nabalitaan ni Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this. Load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your household and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. And you, Joseph, are commanded to say, do this. Take the wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for the wives, and to bring your father and come. And have no concern for your food, for the best of the land of Egypt is yours. Pharaoh's favor rested upon Joseph for good cause, because of him, there is no famine. There is still food in Egypt, so his favor. Pharaoh's invitation is a royal confirmation that what Joseph did was approved by Pharaoh. And in fact, if you really look into it, the offer of Pharaoh was better than the offer of Joseph. Verse 21. The sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the commands of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for their journey. To each and all he gave a change of clothes, and to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 change of clothes. Remember in Genesis chapter 7 what happened? They took his clothes and sold them for 20 silvers. Here, Joseph gives him clothes and gives them silver. To his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys loaded with good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provisions for his father on the journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and departed, and said to them, do not quarrel on the way. He had a feeling, mag-aaway-aaway mga to. Why? What would we tell Dad? Remember, Jacob was waiting at home while all of this was happening. Now, the lie will be exposed. Verse 25. So they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. And they told him, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. What? You mean you lied to me all this time? That's why it says, and his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. What are you telling me? What are you telling me? Joseph is alive? Di ba he's been dead? Di ba you told me he was eaten by an animal? His heart was numb. He could not. And he would not believe them, knowing the fact that the brothers were known to be liars. Verse 27. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagon, and that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of the father Jacob revived. You know, the words of the brothers was not sufficient to convince the dad. But when they saw the treasure trove that was brought, it was undeniable. Somebody big gave this. That was the proof. It was a tangible evidence that no one can refute. Thus in verse 28, and Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive." Jacob had no regards with the stuff that was brought, with the silver that was brought, with the grains that was... Hindi siya, tingnan nga natin kano kadaming dala niya. Tingnan natin mga pasulubong. He had no care. All he wanted to do is, I will go and see him before I die, the son whom I love. This narrative shows the unbelievable, miraculous response of Joseph in forgiving his brothers, despite all that they have done. Because Joseph saw God's sovereign hand in everything. He did not forgive because God commanded. Because we are commanded to forgive. In Matthew 18:21, when the apostle said, "Lord, how many times should we forgive? 7 times?" He said, "No, 70 times 7. You're commanded to forgive." He did not forgive because he has been forgiven. And the Bible tells us in Ephesians 4:32, "Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God had in Christ has forgiven you." He did not forgive because he was forgiven. He forgave because he knows that he has a God that is sovereign. Knowing that the pains, the hurts, the sufferings, the difficulty that people inflict in their lives is not outside the sovereign, loving rule of God. That gives us no reason not to forgive. Okay, there's a command. You can forgive. Hindi pa pwede? Forgive. For you being to forgive him. Hindi pa rin pwede. Okay, forgive because God is sovereign. Has anybody offended you that you cannot forgive? Is there anybody that you want to extract payment from? You know, I pray that we've learned from Genesis chapter 45, the very heart of forgiveness. It is a genuine belief and a deep-seated conviction that our God rules and reigns in this world. And that your life, there is no such thing as an accident with God. Thus says the Lord. Amen. For our last song.